I spent 22 days in a hospital bed in Halifax, and not one person who carries my last name walked through that door. Not my son. Not my daughter. Not the man I was married to for 31 years before the divorce, though I'll admit I stopped expecting anything from him a long time ago. I'm talking about my own children, my own flesh and blood. The two people I raised by myself after their father decided 55 was the perfect age to discover he wanted a different kind of life. 22 days. That's almost 530 hours of IV poles and blood pressure cuffs, and a roommate named Doreen, who snored like a chainsaw, and the overnight nurse checking my vitals at 4 in the morning, with a flashlight so gentle. I nearly cried, just from being touched, kindly. My name is Eleanor. I'm 58 years old. And this is the story of how my own children showed me exactly where I rank in their lives. And how a $5 e-transfer taught them more than 58 years of motherhood ever could. It started on a Sunday in February. The kind of Halifax cold that gets into your joints. I was shoveling the front walk before church because I refused to let snow sit longer than it has to, and I felt this pressure in my chest like someone had set a sandbag on me. I sat down right there on the porch steps, snow shovel still in my hand, and I remember thinking, very calmly, this is not indigestion. A neighbor found me 20 minutes later when I hadn't moved. I don't remember the ambulance ride. I remember waking up in the QEII with tubes in places. Tubes shouldn't be, and a cardiologist telling me I'd had what they call a significant cardiac event, and that there would be a procedure, and that I would not be going home anytime soon. The first thing I did once I could hold a phone steady was call my daughter. Sandra. That's not her real name. I'm changing names here, you'll understand why. Picked up on the 5th ring, sounding like she'd just woken up even though it was 2 in the afternoon. I told her what happened. I told her I'd had a heart attack and there was a stent going in and I was scared, genuinely scared. The kind of scared you don't really feel until you're the one in the gown. She was quiet for a second and then she said, "Oh my God, Mom, that's so scary. Keep me posted, okay? I've got Liam's hockey thing in an hour." And that was it, keep me posted. Like I was a weather system she needed to track from a safe distance. I called my son next. Declan picked up on the 3rd ring with the television blaring behind him, some hockey game, and when I told him, he said, "Geez, okay, well, let me know how it goes." And then, before he'd even properly hung up, I heard him ask his girlfriend if she wanted anything from the fridge. Not even from the kitchen. From the fridge, like he couldn't be bothered to walk the extra 10 feet for his mother's cardiac event. I lay in that hospital bed that first night with the heart monitor beeping its steady rhythm and I looked at the door, certain that any minute now it would open. It didn't. Not that night. Not the next one either. I want to be fair, because fairness is something I've always tried to hold on to even when it costs me. Sandra did text. Sporadically. "How are you feeling on day 4? No question mark, like even the punctuation was too much effort. Hope you're doing better on day 9 with a little heart emoji. As though I'd had a head cold and not a heart attack that nearly stopped my pulse on the table. Declan sent exactly 2 texts the entire 22 days. The second one asked if I still had his old hockey bag in my basement, because his buddy needed to borrow it. I watched the woman in the next bed over, Doreen with the snoring, have her grandchildren visit every single day after school, little drawings taped up on the wall by the window, until it looked like an art show. I watched a man down the hall get visited, by what seemed like his entire curling league, taking turns, bringing him Tim Hortons because the hospital coffee, in his words, tastes like punishment. And I had a young nurse named Priya. I'm using her real first name because she deserves that much, who started sneaking me extra pudding cups off the cart, because, in her words, somebody's got to spoil you a little. Eleanor. A 26-year-old stranger who'd known me 4 days, cared more about whether I made it through the night than the 2 people who'd called me mom their entire lives. I cried more in that hospital from being forgotten than I ever did from the actual procedure, and there is something about that particular kind of pain that doesn't just hurt in the moment. It teaches you something. Cell by cell, it shows you exactly where you rank, and once you've learned that lesson, there's no unlearning it. You can only decide what you're going to do with what you now know. They discharged me on a Wednesday. Nobody came to drive me. I called a cab with hands that still shook from the beta blockers, and I went home to a house that had sat untouched for over 3 weeks. The plants on my kitchen windowsill were dead, brown, and curled. The mail had piled up against the door so thick I had to push it open. I sat down right there on my front hall floor, coat still on, too tired to even take my boots off, and I made myself a promise. I would never again confuse obligation with love. I would never again let they're my children stand in for they care. And the next time either of them needed something from me, I told myself, sitting on that cold floor, I was finally going to let myself say no. I didn't have to wait long to test it. Exactly 22 days after I came home, I counted because by then I was counting everything. The way you keep a ledger when you suspect a trial is coming. My phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. Not "how's your heart healing?" Not "I'm sorry I wasn't there." Just this. "Hi Mom. So exciting. Liam's getting baptized in May and we're doing a big reception after at the hall. We found this gorgeous venue but it's $4,800 for the deposit and catering and we're a little short. Any chance you could help out? Family helps family, right?" I read it 3 times. I actually laughed out loud, sitting alone in my kitchen. The kind of laugh that has no warmth in it whatsoever, just disbelief looking for somewhere to go. $4,800. For a reception. From the daughter who'd left me on red while I was learning to walk again with a physiotherapist named Dale. Because my legs had gone weak from 3 weeks in a bed. I should tell you a little about Sandra, because context matters here. Sandra is 2 years younger than Declan, and for as long as I can remember, and I mean back to when she was 4 years old, she was the one her father doted on, in ways that used to make me wince. When Sandra wanted a particular winter coat, her father drove 40 minutes to the next town to find it in her size. When Declan needed new boots, because his were letting in slush, he got my old rubber boots stuffed with newspaper until I could afford new ones the following month. I used to think I was imagining the difference. The way you do when you don't want to believe something ugly about your own family. 22 days alone in a cardiac ward with an empty chair beside the bed has a way of burning off every last bit of that doubt. Sandra's text just sat there glowing on my screen. This perfect little artifact of everything that had gone sideways in our family without me admitting it. She hadn't called to ask how my recovery was going. She hadn't apologized for a single one of those 22 days. She'd reached out because she needed something. Because that, I was finally letting myself understand, was what I had always been to both of my children. Not a mother. A resource with a checking account. I thought about not responding at all. I thought about writing back a long scorched earth message detailing every missed call, every keep me posted, every cold silence. I drafted it twice in my head and deleted it both times, because I realized something. They didn't deserve my explanation. They certainly didn't deserve the kind of anger that takes real effort to put into words. They deserved exactly the level of care they had shown me. So I opened my banking app. I sent $5 an e-transfer to Sandra's account. No security question because she already had it saved from years ago. In the message field, I typed 3 words. "Good luck, sweetie." Then I put my phone face down on the counter and went to bed and slept the first full, peaceful night I'd had in over a month. I want you to picture the storm that broke the next morning, because I certainly did. Lying there in the dark smiling at the ceiling like I'd won something. My imagination, it turned out, wasn't far off. 9 missed calls from Sandra by 8 in the morning. 4 texts from Declan, a man who had sent exactly 2 messages during my entire hospitalization, suddenly finding it in himself to type in full sentences with proper capitalization. And then, finally, a message from Sandra herself, the first real words she'd sent me in weeks that weren't about her own life. "Are you actually serious right now? $5? Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" I showed it to the venue coordinator because I thought there was some mistake. "Aunt Whitney thinks you're punishing me for something. This is supposed to be a happy time and you're making it about you. Making it about me." I sat with that phrase a long while, as if surviving a heart attack alone, as if grieving the absence of 2 grown children, who couldn't be bothered to drive across the city to see if their mother was still breathing, as if all 22 days of that silence were somehow a performance I'd staged to ruin a baptism reception. I didn't answer anyone that day. I let the messages pile up the way the mail had piled up against my door, untouched, accumulating, becoming their own kind of evidence. It was Declan who finally called, 2 days later, on an actual voice line instead of texting. "Mom," he said, with that particular tight voice he gets when he's irritated but trying to sound reasonable. What was that about? Sandra's a wreck. She's saying everyone at the church group is going to be asking questions now. Is that so terrible? I said. People asking questions? She just wants Liam's baptism to be nice. Is that such a crime? And something in me sealed shut for 22 days of swallowed silence, finally cracked open. Declan, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected it to. I had a heart attack a little over a month ago. Did you know I coded for almost 2 minutes on that table? Did you know that? Silence on his end. No, he admitted, quiet. I didn't realize it was that bad. You didn't realize because you never asked. Neither of you did. That's not fair, Mom. We were busy. Work's been busy, I said, for 22 days. Both of you. Busy? He didn't have an answer for that because there isn't one. There's no version of busy that explains 2 grown children failing to show up for their mother fighting for her life. Not when those same 2 children managed to find time for hockey, practice and reception venues in that exact same window. So that $5, I told him, was me telling you exactly how much I had left to give to people who showed me, as clearly as anyone ever has, how much they had to give to me. You want $4,800 from a woman you couldn't be bothered to call more than twice in a month? You already have my answer. I hung up before he could say anything else. It didn't feel like anger. It felt like setting down something heavy I'd been hauling around far too long. But the story doesn't end there. Because 2 weeks after that, something happened that changed everything. I thought I understood about that whole month. I was at my cousin Patricia's place. Patricia, who'd actually come to see me twice in the hospital, with homemade soup and a stack of paperbacks because she remembered I like mysteries. For a small family supper, when she said something almost in passing. I'm so glad you're doing better, she said. We were all worried sick when Sandra told everyone you didn't want visitors. I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth. What? Patricia's face shifted and I could see her realize in real time that she'd said something I had no idea about. Sandra told the family you specifically said you wanted privacy, that visitors stressed you out, that you'd be embarrassed for people to see you hooked up to everything. I sat there in Patricia's kitchen, with something cold spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with my heart. Because I had never said that. Not once. I remembered, with painful clarity, telling Sandra on more than one of those rare phone calls, how much I wished someone would just come sit with me for an hour. My daughter hadn't just failed to show up. She had constructed an entire story to explain her own absence, and worse, she'd made my loneliness look like my own choice, my own coldness, instead of her neglect. She'd taken my pain and repackaged it into something that made her look thoughtful. Probably so. Nobody in the family would start asking the uncomfortable question of where she'd actually been. I asked Patricia, gently, if she'd tell me honestly what else had gone around in the family group chat during that month. The one I'd been quietly removed from years back after a disagreement over a Thanksgiving seating chart that I still maintain wasn't my fault. She hesitated, but she pulled it up. What I read explained a great deal. There were messages from Sandra throughout my hospital stay, casually updating everyone that I was doing fine, resting, didn't want a fuss. There was an exchange between her and Whitney, dated the week I'd had a second cardiac scare that put the whole team on alert, where Sandra wrote that she was absolutely buried with reception planning and couldn't help Whitney with something she'd needed. Buried with reception planning, while I lay there with monitors going off and a nurse holding my hand because nobody else's was free. There was no mention anywhere of how serious it had actually been. No fear, no worry, just a quiet, convenient erasure designed so nobody would think to drive across town and complicate the version of events she was telling. I sat in my car outside Patricia's house for a long while after I left, just breathing, recalculating everything I thought I'd understood about that month. I'd assumed it was ordinary negligence, the regular failures of busy, imperfect children. This was something else entirely. This was a choice, dressed up and hidden, built specifically so I would carry that abandonment by myself, quietly, without even the smallest dignity of other people knowing the truth. That's when I decided $5 wasn't enough. Not because I wanted revenge for the sake of it, but because I refused to keep being the only one who knew what had actually happened. I didn't make a scene. I didn't post anything dramatic tagging the whole family. What I did was quieter and a good deal more effective. I asked Patricia to add me back into the family group chat, just briefly, just long enough to say one thing. When she did, I posted a single message, time-stamped, undeniable, a photo of my hospital discharge papers showing the dates of admission and the cardiac procedure, alongside one line. For anyone who was told I didn't want visitors, that isn't true. I asked for help every single day I was in there. I just didn't get it. I think people deserve to know that before the baptism. I left the chat right after sending it. I didn't need to watch the replies come in. I just needed the truth to exist somewhere outside my own head. What Patricia told me afterward was that the fallout was significant. Aunt Whitney, the same one who'd apparently been told I was punishing Sandra over the e-transfer, called Sandra directly demanding to know what was going on. Other relatives, the ones who'd quietly wondered why nobody had mentioned visiting me, finally had their answer. And it didn't reflect well on anyone but me. Sandra tried, predictably, to spin it, claiming I'd been confused on the heart medication and was misremembering things. But discharge paperwork doesn't get confused. Dates don't slur their words on beta blockers. The truth had teeth now, and it didn't need her permission to bite. As for the reception, I heard through Patricia, because I'd made it clear I wasn't taking calls from Sandra or Declan directly anymore. That they scaled it back considerably. No hall, no caterer. A small gathering at the church basement instead. Because several relatives who'd been planning to chip in suddenly developed a newfound reluctance once they understood the full picture of what my hospital stay had actually looked like. I didn't do any of it to sabotage Liam's baptism. I want to be honest about that. I did it because I refuse to spend whatever years I have left absorbing cruelty quietly so somebody else can keep their comfortable version of events. If the truth made things harder for them, that wasn't on me. That was simply the cost of a lie finally needing daylight. It's been almost a year now. I haven't spoken to Sandra or Declan since that message in the group chat. No grand reconciliation, no tearful phone call where everything suddenly makes sense. Just quiet. The same quiet they gave me for 22 days. Except now it's a quiet I chose, and there's a strange kind of peace in that. What I have instead is Patricia, who still calls every Sunday. I have a neighbor, Garth, who I'd known for years. Only as the man who shovels his walk at 6 in the morning, who started bringing my mail in for me without ever being asked, who drove me to 2 cardiac rehab appointments in February when the roads were bad. Because, as he put it, that's just what you do for someone on your street. I have a small circle now of people who understand that showing up isn't optional, isn't something you do only when there's a deposit due or a favor to collect. I think about that empty chair beside my hospital bed sometimes. 22 days of it sitting there untouched. A quiet little monument to exactly where I ranked. I don't carry the same grief over it anymore though. I think of it now as the moment I finally understood the difference between the family you're given and the family that actually shows up. So here's what I keep coming back to. More than I probably should. If the people who are supposed to love you without condition only call when they need something, do you think $5, 2 words was too harsh? Or was it exactly the answer they'd earned?